Did early LDS leaders really teach that some sins require a person's own blood to be shed for forgiveness, otherwise known as blood atonement? And was this doctrine ever really practiced? Let's take a look. So Brigham Young made a number of statements on the topic. He said, "There are sins that men commit for which they cannot receive forgiveness in this world, nor in that which is to come. And if they had their eyes open, they would be perfectly willing to have their blood spilt, that smoke thereof might ascend to heaven as an offering for their sins." He also said, "There are sins that can be atoned for by an offering upon an altar, as in ancient days, and there are sins that the blood of a lamb or a calf or a turtle dove cannot remit, but they must be atoned for by the blood of the man." He further went on with, "This is loving our neighbour as ourselves. If he needs help, help him. And if he wants salvation, it is necessary to spill his blood on the earth in order that he may be saved. Spill it." And he also said, "I would ask how many covenant breakers there are in this city and in this kingdom. I believe that there are a great many. And if they are covenant breakers, we need a place designated where we can shed their blood." So what was the doctrine of blood atonement? The doctrine of blood atonement simply was the idea that there are certain sins, such as murder, apostasy or denying the Holy Ghost, or interracial marriage, for which the atonement would not be sufficient. If an individual committed one of these sins, they would need their life to be taken in order to receive atonement, and that it was appropriate to take the life of the sinner by force if needed. So was this doctrine ever practiced? Well, it's hard to say. Due to its nature, if it had been practiced, the practice would have been shrouded in secrecy, and therefore it's very difficult to verify whether this was actually carried out. However, there are some historical accounts that suggest it may have occurred. Rosmus Anderson. Rosmus Anderson was a member of the church in 1856 who was seeking a plural wife. He decided he wanted to marry his stepdaughter, which was permitted at the time, but his bishop also wanted to marry the same woman. During the Reformation, leaders of the church would interview all the members individually and ask them to confess their sins, confess their belief in the doctrines of the church, and then encourage them to be rebaptized. During the Reformation, when Rosmus was interviewed, he confessed that he had had an affair with the stepdaughter. At the time, Rosmus was rebaptized, was forgiven, and life carried on. However, he was later caught having an affair again with the same person. At that time, he was taken, a pit was dug, he had to kneel in the pit, and he was executed by having his throat slit. And this was suggested to be in line with the blood atonement blood atonement doctrine. What's the source for this? It's interesting. The source comes from the confession of John D. Lee when he was confessing to the Mountain Meadows massacre. At the time, it has to be accepted that John D. Lee was seeking to protect himself, and there are questions about the accuracy and the claims that he made. However, there is evidence and suggestion that this incident did occur. In March 1857, William R. Parrish became disillusioned with the faith and decided to leave the Utah Territory with his family. As the Parrish family prepared to part, William and his son Beaton were attacked near their home. Both had their throats slit, leading to their deaths. Historian Juanita Brooks noted that such violent enforcement of religious oaths was a literal and terrible reality, advocated by Brigham Young without compromise. There are many accounts that relate to that Utah period, which suggests members of the church were very fearful for their lives, particularly in cases of apostasy. The church has long disavowed the doctrine of blood atonement, and there have been a number of statements over the years to that effect. Charles W. Penrose in 1884 published a pamphlet as a leader of the church, and in that pamphlet he stated that this was not a doctrine of the church and disavowed it. It was also disavowed in 1889 by a statement from the First Presidency, strongly denying that blood atonement was a doctrine of the church. 1978, McConkie was sending a letter answering queries about doctrines of the church, and this being one of them, and in that he also did disavow the policy as something of the doctrine rather as something we don't practice. Although it's interesting to note that in Mormon doctrine, McConkie did say, but under certain circumstances, there are some serious sins for which the cleansing of Christ does not operate, and the law of God is that men must then have their own blood shed to atone for their sins. Mormon doctrine goes on to suggest that this doctrine would only be appropriate in the cases of if we were living in a theocracy, which obviously we are not, and therefore the doctrine doesn't apply. In 2010, there was an official statement from the church again disavowing the policy, the doctrine of blood atonement. So did they really teach that? Yes. But whether the doctrine was practiced is subject to conjecture and not clear. The church does state the doctrine was never officially recognised, and it has been disavowed for over a century. The doctrines of the church do not change. The principles of the gospel are unchangeable.